The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.
Hello and welcome to your Monday night property edition of Your Money, Your Call. I'm Margaret Lomas. Realestate.com.au, Australia's #1 property site, has exposed 4 of the biggest myths preventing consumers from entering the property market. As a result, they're urging those looking to buy or sell not to be misled by current hearsay and to take the leap and make a move this autumn. Research conducted by realestate.com.au has identified 4 common property market myths among Aussies. Firstly, the time of the year doesn't impact the success of buying and selling property. Secondly, first home buyers are being forced out of the market. Thirdly, properties are currently overvalued. And lastly, low auction clearance rates means that houses aren't selling. Debunking these myths, Joanne White from realestate.com.au says that autumn is definitely a popular time for people looking to buy and sell property. She says that as there's a broader price range of properties available on the market, there's never been a better time to dive in. Now, here with me tonight to discuss this issue and also answer your questions is Julia Hartman from Bantax and Rob Farmer from Run. And right now is your chance to ask these guys any property investing question that you might have. Now, of course, you can do this by calling us on 1300 30 34 35, and of course you can also email us at property@skynews.com.au. So get to the phones and welcome to the program. And welcome to you both.
Thanks, Margaret.
Well, look, let's dive straight into these 4 common property myths that realestate.com.au has uncovered. And of course, they interviewed and surveyed people to find out how the Australian public's feeling at the moment. The first thing they came out with is that people believe that the time of the year is important when you buy and sell property, but in fact, we're finding that that's not the case. Rob?
There are many myths around property, Margaret, and I'm amazed where they come from. And certainly time of year is one of those things that people tend to focus on as a really bad time or a really good time to sell. I think it's all about supply and demand property, and it's really about making sure that there's a buyer out for their property, for your property should you go and buy it. And times like autumn are terrific times to find a buyer for your property.
I agree. Look, I put my house on the market just before Christmas, and most people would say that that was total anathema. You should never do that. I have a property that's difficult to sell because of the kind of property that it is. It's an acreage, lots of bedrooms. It really appeals to a very, very specific market. We had kind of like a soft sell over Christmas, and we took it off for 3 weeks, and we sold it. We've already sold it. And so, you know, that to me just totally proves, and that would have been a difficult property to sell, that the time of the year isn't as important as people think, that you've really got to be able to watch the market and work out when the demand is going to start building up.
That's right, and also every year isn't the same. So in some years a particular month has been a terrific time to sell, in other years it hasn't. So it's really about being in touch with what's going on in your particular area as well.
Julie, the second myth is that first home buyers are being forced out of the market. Now, I uncovered some really interesting data just on the weekend, and it said that the median house price is 6 times today what it was in the 1980s. The median income is 3.5 times, and as a result of that, analysts are saying that the property market is 40 to 50% overvalued. But when you take into account the halving of mortgage rates and the fact that in the 80s it was 15 cents for every dollar of debt and today it's only 7, in fact affordability today is identical to what it was in the 80s.
That's interesting, Margaret. Especially now there's more mum and dad working too, so there's more income to the family, I gather, isn't taken into that because you're only taking wages into account.
Absolutely. And there's a real flaw, I think, when you do look at affordability according to wages. And I wonder if there isn't an argument for considering instead disposable income when you're considering affordability. You know, the way I see it is that so many of those things that we traditionally had to save for a long time time for when we were younger, like, you know, your first lounge suite, you know, even things like your kitchen items, your brooms and all your bits and pieces. We didn't have a reject shop, and we didn't have fantastic furniture in those places where you could get everything more cheaply. And I think in terms of disposable income, young people tend to have more disposable income than we had when we were their age.
Yeah, even if you look at clothes and that, the cost of clothes in the 1980s as a percentage of wage was huge.
Absolutely.
Now you'd be spending the same amount dollar value.
It used to cost me an entire week's wage to buy a dress,
Yeah.
and as a result of that I used to sew. We all learned to sew, and we used to sew our clothes, and I'd sew clothes for the family. Today you wouldn't do that because it costs you more to sew the clothes than it does to actually buy them.
Yeah.
So I guess with the cost of living, and people don't really think about that. Okay, what about the third myth, that properties are currently overvalued? Rob, I'd suggest that when people say that, it's because they're very influenced by headlines at the moment, and headlines typically look at a whole market and often are reporting properties at the higher end of the market, when in fact we've got plenty of affordable properties in the country.
Yeah, it's quite comical to look at the headlines over a 10-year period, and there's sort of this fear greed thing happens within the media. And one minute it's interesting and it makes headlines to say the market's going to crash and it's doomsday, and the next, you know, in 6 months' time we're reading, you know, you've missed the market because it's booming. I think property is always worth what people are prepared to pay. It is a market, though, I would say, where you've got to keep your wits about you. Don't just believe what people tell you something is worth. Do your research, as I know you always say. Do your research, really understand what's going on in a particular market before you do something.
And in fact, I dug back 30 years to look at what the headlines were in 1982, and the headlines in 1982 was, don't buy property because your kids will never be able to afford it.
Yeah.
And it said how property was a very bad investment and it just couldn't continue to go up in value, and that was a 1982 headline, 30 years old. And it's interesting because you could take that headline out and pop it in today's paper and people would believe it was a headline.
And they
from
probably
today.
have. I think the other thing on that is that people are sheep. We do it, particularly with investing. So when people say it's a really good market, everyone wants to jump in together and, you know, try and enter the market in the good times. I think for smart investors, they make their money when they buy into markets as they are now, which are probably softer. So probably smart investors are actually looking at current markets as an opportunity rather than a problem.
Absolutely. Now, just quickly, Julia, the last one, low auction clearance rates mean that houses aren't selling. In fact, to me, that's a real myth, because the percentage of properties that are actually sold just after an auction takes place, or even before an auction, is far greater, and only a small number of properties are ever really sold at auction. Most properties are sold by private treaty.
Yeah, you just go to an auction to see how prices are going and what's happening, don't you?
That's what I think too.
I don't think it's a fair measure at the average sale.
I agree. Most buyers are there to get a benchmark. Very few buyers actually attend an auction deciding to buy, hoping that instead that they'll get a feel for the market, and that'll give them some negotiating power to go in just afterward. Okay, so we might come back to some of those myths and some of the other things that realestate.com got out of that study, but let's go to the phones. And Jessie from WA, you've got a question for me about Rockhampton.
Yes, I do.
Hi, Jessie.
Hello, we're trying to look at an investment property, and we've been doing a bit of research in Rockhampton. We just want to know what your opinion was of that area, and will it get some capital growth, and what will it achieve in the future? What sort of thing are we looking at, maybe?
Okay, well, let me go to the panel first. Does anyone on the panel have an opinion on Rockhampton, for starters? Rob?
I don't have a strong opinion on Rockhampton. I suppose I hear a lot of people talk about Rockhampton as a place to invest. I suppose generally I tend to recommend that people don't get too excited about areas where there is just one type of activity. And mining towns in particular, I get quite nervous about. So Rockhampton, I think there's lots of people that have made a lot of money in Rockhampton, but I would be very careful about it unless it's part of a broader investing strategy.
Julia?
I recently did an article for API on fly-out workers. It's becoming more and more with the mining towns. So the BHP intends in its new mine flying people out from the Sunshine Coast, from the Gold Coast. So again, I'm hesitant about anything that relies on mining, but at least Rockhampton's a bit diversified.
Exactly, and the issue about fly in, fly out workers is a very, very good one, because what's actually happening is in areas and mining towns where there's a predominance of fly in, fly out workers, we're getting a really weak underlying economy because they take the money out and they take it back and spend it in their own hometown. So while the houses are going up in value, there's actually nothing to underpin that with any kind of stability in the economy, no money made available to the locals for infrastructure spending. So the minute something happens in terms of the resources, then there's nothing to underpin that ridiculous house price growth, and it all can fall over very, very quickly, which is a problem. Having said all of that, I actually like Rockhampton for its influence by mining, but not its reliance on mining, Jessie. And I guess Gladstone, which is around about an hour nearby, has already started to go up in value, and the yields have gone up really, really well. But all that's happening in Gladstone really is the mining. Rockhampton, on the other hand, does have an airport, so does Gladstone, but it's got a fairly diversified industry base already. People exist in Rockhampton not for mining, but for all the different kinds of work that they can do there. And there's a lot going for Rockhampton, but it's still a highly affordable market. It's a market that you can get in around the $200,000 to $250,000 mark. And better still, a lot of the properties there are on very large blocks that are available for subdivision. So what you can do in Rockhampton is you can be in the very, very enviable position of buying a property and getting a good yield of around 7%, and then down the track, if you'd like to, or you're ready, or you think you can take it on board, you can pop another dwelling behind it for a fairly cheap amount of money, and then immediately increase your yield by getting two incomes on the one property. Certainly the council's quite amenable to you doing that as well. So I like Rockhampton. I think it has quite low risk in terms of where it's going to go. I don't see it moving greatly anytime soon, but certainly if we push it out to maybe a 4 to 5 year mark, I think if you get in now and get the yields for now, then you'll start seeing some growth coming into that market in a couple of years' time. Maria from Perth, you have a question about principal property.
Yes. I'm wanting to rent out my principal place of residence because I want to go travelling, and I was thinking of going travelling overseas for 12 months.
Yes.
My place is mortgage free.
Okay.
So, can you give me some advice on this, on what sort of strategy I could use?
Absolutely. You've rung on exactly the right night, because we have Julia here, and Julia can tell you all about the... You can't hear that either? Okay. Yes, we're having a little bit of trouble with our audio here, but I got most of that. Maria is going to be travelling overseas, and she has a principal place of residence that has no mortgage on it. She wants to leave it for 12 months, and she's just wondering about some strategies. And I guess to that end we can talk about the principal place of residence exemption, the capital gains tax impact of all of that, and maybe what she can do with the property while she's away.
Yes, it doesn't matter whether she rents it out or leaves it vacant if it's only for a year. And she still can cover it with her main residence exemption. If you're only going over there for a year, are you? And coming back to live in Australia permanently, so she's not changing her residency.
Yes, just for a year, going away for just an extended stay overseas.
Okay, and sorry,
it's difficult because you can't hear anything here. That's okay.
So she.
That's fine.
Sorry.
You can talk to Maria. Maria's there listening to you.
Okay. Yep. She's going to have to pay tax if she rents it out in Australia. She's going to have to put in an Australian tax return, and as it was positively geared, she will probably have to pay non-residence tax rates. It depends whether she's overseas for a holiday. If she's just a holiday, she stays a resident of Australia for tax purposes. But if she does set up a home overseas and works over there, then she's considered a non-resident of Australia for tax purposes, and she'd be taxed at 29 cents on the dollar on the profit on the rental property. But she'd still be able to keep her main residence exemption on it, even though she becomes a resident overseas for tax purposes.
Okay, so Maria, just in a nutshell for you, because I know we've been a little bit off and on with that. We're having some trouble here with some sound. But Maria, you can leave your principal place of residence, and so long as you only move out for a period of up to 6 years, and then come back or sell it within that time, it will remain a capital gains tax-free asset, even if you lease it out to somebody else and make an income on it. And that's the beauty of your principal place of residence exemption. Now remember, during that that time you can't claim another principal place of residence exemption, which you're probably unlikely to do because you're not going to be on our shores, you're going to be away from home, and so you can take advantage of that and still have an asset that you can either later sell or move back in, and it remains capital gains tax free for you. If you are one day outside of the 6 years, unfortunately, then it will begin to accrue capital gains tax from that 6 years out, but so long as you keep that 6 year period, you're going to be fine. Oh, and Julia is now waving to me. That means she would like to say something else. Julia.
I'll just add to that, that you get an indefinite period of exemption if it's not earning income. I had some clients that were overseas and they wanted to stay an extra 6 months, and they said, what can we do? Because we've got tenants in there and the 6 years is nearly up. I said, just stop charging them rent.
Okay.
Leave them there to look after the place for you. So it's only that 6 years that she can't rent it, that she can rent it out, and then she can leave it vacant, come back if she's ready.
Okay, now that's interesting, because what happens if they do leave it, and then they get another home? Then of course it's not their principal place of residence anymore. It's only because they're overseas, isn't it, really, that they can invoke that?
No, you can
indefinite?
choose. It's a choice provision.
Okay, and
so
if you've got two properties, if one just remains vacant, but then you can still claim that as your principal place of residence for 20 years, so long as you don't rent it out. It doesn't earn an income.
And if she has a home overseas, then while she's a resident overseas for tax purposes, Australia's got no right to tax that. So it doesn't matter about her main residence exemption. She's better having that out here as long as she sells that home overseas before she comes back.
Okay, well there you go, Maria. You should be a full bottle on that now, so I hope that has helped you out. And good luck with that, and have a nice time overseas. Well, this week we're continuing with our question of the week, and as always, I'd like to be able to give away a copy of one of my books. If you're tuning in for the first time, each week the panel and I will choose one question from either the emails or the calls and send a copy of one of my books. Now this week I'd like to send the 20 must-ask questions for every property investor. Now this is a must-have guide for anyone about to buy property, and includes all the criteria you need to make the right choice. To be in the running, call us on 1300 30 34 35 or email property@skynews.com.au with a question. Make sure that you watch at the end of the show to see if you're the lucky person. It's time now for us to take a short break, but stay with us. After the break, the panel and I will be taking more calls and, of course, answering email. Welcome back to the property edition of Your Money, Your Call. This evening I have with me in the studio Julia Hartman from Bantax and Rob Farmer from Run. And we've been chatting about all sorts of things, and we're about to chat about property management. Now, if you'd like to call about any topic that we're speaking about tonight, or any other question at all about property, grab the phone and call us. The number is 1300 30 34 35, or of course you can email us on property@skynews.com.au, just like the following person did, who emailed us with a question about NRAS property, and we often get this kind of question. And Andrew wrote, "Hi Margaret, have you written anything on NRAS or provided information on these properties, in particular in Townsville's Northern Beaches? I would appreciate your advice." Now, I'd like to break this question up into three and start with you, Julia, on the tax implications in terms of NRAS and whether or not they present a good tax option.
Well, the tax situation is exactly the same. You get all the usual deductions. Your only problem is you're only allowed to charge 80% of the market value of the rent, which gives you a lot of negative gearing advantages. And then you've got this $10,000 odd a year that your government gives you, which is tax-free. So you can see the reduced rent, the increased negative gearing with a really high tax bracket can be quite good, considering the NRAS assistance is tax-free.
And Rob, what's your experience with these properties? What do you think of them in general?
I have a fundamental principle that focus on the investment first, Margaret, and then worry about tax advantages or other incentives later. And I think the problem with NRAS properties is people get so caught up in how terrific and well packaged some of these offerings are that they forget about the underlying investment that they're buying. So I think NRAS in itself is a fantastic offering. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the times that we see these products packaged up, they're in areas where I wouldn't invest in sort of fundamentally. So focus on the investment, then worry about the other tax or incentives related to it.
Andrew, some very good advice there from the panel, and I'm in agreement with everything that Rob has said too. One of the things about NRAS property is that you do get those tax benefits, but in reality it's just like any other scheme of arrangement, tax scheme, any rental guarantee that you might get. It might seem like a good idea and very, very attractive in terms of those tax benefits or the rent guarantee or whatever the case may be. But unless the underlying asset exists in an area that has great investment fundamentals, you risk being attracted to that, and once those tax benefits or rental guarantee has gone away, you might end up being left with a lemon. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all NRAS properties are lemons. What I'm saying is you should be choosing where you're going to invest first based on what you can know about its investment fundamentals. Does it have a growing population? Is the median household income growing faster than the national average? Is the council committed to infrastructure planning, and is there a great population growth there? There's a whole lot of things you have to ask first. Once you've asked those questions and identified an area, then if there's a scheme of arrangement or a rent guarantee or some other incentive over the top of that, and you're not paying too much or more for the property to get that particular benefit, then having an NRAS or a rental guarantee or anything like that might be a good idea. If those underlying fundamentals don't stack up, then those tax benefits aren't going to do anything for you except expose you to an asset that you can't leverage against and you can't use in the future, and probably won't provide a good retirement income. In terms of Townsville North, I actually like some of that area. I think Townsville's a pretty good place to invest, so it's going to depend where in Townsville North you're talking about. Ask the questions and find out for yourself whether it's an area that you think can provide an ongoing growth in that particular property. Lisa from Sydney, you've got a question about Castledean.
Oh, hi, Margaret. My question is just another investment being a DHA, a little bit different than NRAS, but on the same topic, I guess. I was considering either a property in Everton Park or Castledean. Both properties are pretty similar in that they're both three-bedroom townhouses, both constructed in the same year. The yield is not too different for either property. I was just wondering what your thoughts or the panel thoughts were in regards to the areas.
Yes. Now, before I go to the panel, I'm assuming that the reason why you've been attracted to those two areas is because you've obviously been shown some DHA property and that's where they happen to exist.
That's right.
Yeah, so you haven't chosen those areas because you know they're good areas.
Well, I have had a little bit of inquiries with Everton Park. And it's fairly close to Brisbane, and there are a few other of the growth factors that I thought may have been appealing, and I've watched the show a bit, and I think these have come up in your show before.
Okay, those two particular areas actually haven't, but Rob, just in regard to DHA property, and it's a good one for you to answer because your company is a property management company, and essentially DHA is almost like a property management company too, but for defence housing.
Yes. Listen, in terms of the DHA element, Lisa, I can't really comment on whether or not that's the right thing for you. In terms of the areas that you talked about, I would be particularly careful of some of the areas that around that area where you're talking about. It's a very interesting market, the Brisbane market at the moment, and there are properties sitting out there that are very difficult to sell. Values are very difficult in a lot of areas. So again, without being overly cautious, I'd really come back to focusing on the areas. Make sure that they are areas that you can answer the questions that you need to about them. I suppose the good thing about DHA is you don't have to focus too much on the tenant and those sorts of things, but at some point in time you do need to make sure that it's an area that you would invest in long term. The other thing that I'd say about property in the Brisbane market is that you can do some really good deals at the moment. There is a lot of people in a lot of distress in Queensland generally when it comes to property. So make sure that when you buy a property, if it's set up by DHA or anyone else offering a property, that you compare it to stock that's sitting out there on the market, and you make sure that you're getting value for money with that property itself.
Yeah, look, I'm also in agreement there. One of the things about DHA is, just like NRAS and just like any other rent guarantee, the DHA scheme is really another rent guarantee scheme. Now, you do pay for that scheme. It's a 16% property management fee, and so you're paying much more, probably twice the amount that you would pay for normal property management. And that's okay if you're taking delivery of a property that is at market value and that exists in an area with the underlying investment fundamentals. Some DHA properties do and others don't, and so you've got to take away the fact that it's a DHA property and ask yourself, without any kind of a rental guarantee or scheme of arrangement, would I otherwise have been attracted to this area, or did I just start looking into the area because I was attracted to the DHA proposition? And I'd suggest that you've been attracted to the DHA proposition. Castledean and Everton Park are okay, but they're not on my hotspot lists anywhere, and they're certainly not up there amongst areas that I would highly recommend at this moment in time. So that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the area. It just means that there are other areas that are going to give you a better return for your money and a greater chance of it growing in the very near future. Let's face it, when you buy property, the most important thing that it needs to do after it pays for its own bills through a good rental yield is it has to grow. So if you buy a property that just gets good rental yields or has someone looking after it well but it never grows, then it hasn't been a good investment for you. I'd take a step back from this one. I'd have a good look all around the country to see where those hotspots are. I'd isolate some of those really good areas that the experts are talking about at the moment, and then I'd compare them back to Castledean and Everton Park and ask yourself, am I actually compromising something by buying these areas just to get my rental guarantee, or am I getting a good buy-in price? Am I getting a really good rent return? And is it in an area that has underlying investment fundamentals? Michael from Brisbane, you've got a question for us, and what's that question?
My question is about a damaged kitchen top in a rental.
Okay.
Is the kitchen top, since it's a fixture, is it covered by the normal body corporate insurance?
Right, okay. I can help with that, but can neither of you two help with that? From your perspective, who's responsible for that?
I was going to say, what sort of damage, Michael's been done to the kitchen top?
Michael?
Yeah,
sorry, what kind of damage?
Like heat damaged it.
Yes.
And one looks like they've been using curry or something, spilled something on it and stained the Laminex top. So like these were all done up a couple of years ago. So one's a permanent rental and one's a holiday rental.
Right.
I don't have insurance on the holiday rental because I got caught many years ago. Because landlord insurance, and landlord insurance doesn't apply to holiday rentals.
Yes.
I found that out. I always thought, landlord insurance you covered.
Not holiday rentals actually sit outside a whole range of things, not just insurance, but a whole lot of rights in relation to landlords and tenants. So perhaps a broader topic for another day. But in terms of the kitchen top, one of the most difficult issues for tenants, landlords, and of course property managers who often sit in the middle of these sorts of issues is what constitutes normal wear and tear on a property. So if you rent a property out to a family of 5 for 3 years, at the end of that period, often the property looks quite different to what it did at the beginning of that tenancy. So often it comes down to a somewhat judgmental sort of thing of, well, is that normal wear and tear? Would a wall normally get marked or a carpet normally get worn over that 3-year period? So without actually seeing the top itself, it's difficult to say, well, is it marked slightly and is it normal wear and tear, or is it actually damage to the property, in which case my first port of call would be to speak to the tenant about it and talk about how the damage occurred and whether it would be claimable by the tenant in the first instance.
Okay. And Julia, of course, in the event that he has no recourse to the tenant and has to replace that, then there's a tax deduction that comes with replacing that top.
There certainly is. I'm a bit worried because of the holiday rental. There may be some private use of it, but the main thing is that he doesn't go and replace the whole kitchen, Because if he replaces the whole kitchen, he won't get a deduction. He'll have to write it off over 40 years.
Okay, so but if he just replaces the countertop, it's considered a repair, and he can claim all of that in the year in which the expense occurs.
Yes.
Okay, that's good advice. Look, let me tell you, I guess part of your question was, is the body corporate responsible for that? No, they're not. The body corporate is responsible for the four walls, but once you get inside those four walls, the body corporate isn't responsible for anything inside that property, even though it is a fixture in that property. So it's difficult to explain, but the four walls are common walls and they're owned, I guess, by everybody, which is why the body corporate covers that. But anything inside those four walls belongs to you, you've paid for it, and you must insure it. Your building insurance won't cover that, and you're going to have to take care of that, which is a lot of people don't understand that they need that gap insurance. When they buy a body corporate property, a lot of people don't take building insurance and just take contents insurance because they believe that the building insurance is going to cover them. But it doesn't cover them for those things inside, and you need a little bit of gap insurance for that. I'd be making sure that I had insurance even on a holiday let, and you might not be able to get landlord's insurance, but there's certainly house and contents insurance that you can get, building and contents insurance that you can get. And I guess what Rob is saying is that if the tenant has damaged that because they have been careless and it has created damage that requires a repair, you may have a case for getting them to contribute toward that repair or pay for it. But if it's normal wear and tear, which is probably unlikely to be, I think you're saying it's like a burn in the Laminex, then if it's normal wear and tear, then they're not responsible for that. We're now halfway through the show, which means that you still have time to call us with any question that you might have. Remember that each week the panel and I will choose one question from either the emails or the calls and send a copy of my book. Now this week, the best email will receive the 20 must-ask questions for every property investor. All you have to do is call us on 1300 30 34 35 or email property@skynews.com.au with a question, and make sure you watch at the end of the show to see if you're the lucky person. For now, though, it's time to take a short break, but we'll be back soon, so don't go away. Welcome back, and you're watching the property edition of Your Money, Your Call, and we're answering all of your property investing questions. Tonight you'll be speaking with Julia Hartman from Bantax and Rob Farmer from Run, and between us I'm sure that we can manage any question that you might have. So call us on 1300 30 34 35, or you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. And Eric from Sydney, you've got a question about negative gearing.
Yes, Margaret. What's concerning is I've watched your program for about the last 6 weeks, and there seems to be conviction on your part to convince the panel and yourself that property isn't overvalued. Whether it is or it isn't, I mean, that'll be a question for history, but I dare say the last 20 years will show it is an apparition. And, I mean, property can't continually outstrip inflation or wages growth by, double or triple. My question to Julia is, if we are going to a low inflation environment, how will that affect people who have heavy gearing into property? Thank you, Margaret.
Okay, did you get all of that, Julia?
I heard that one. Thank you, Margaret.
Excellent.
You're not going to get the capital growth is what you're suggesting, and if that be the case, it's going to decrease the amount you can leverage because you've got less equity in the property to buy your next property. But it's not going to change your position in holding the property because tax rate's going to be the same, maybe rent's going to be the same. You see, I have a problem with this in that I don't really believe that it's not going to go ahead because we've got such a shortage of supply. But nevertheless, your negative gearing investment, you work out how much it's going to cost you to hold after you get your tax refund back, and the only things that are going to change that is rents, and you're not suggesting they're not going to go up, and your tax bracket. So it's not going to affect your holding ability, but yes, if you ever want to sell or borrow against the property, if prices go down, yes, but once you're in there.
Yeah, and so look, just to explain to any viewers who might be confused about the question, negative gearing is the process by which we borrow to invest in property, and then we're able to claim any differences between what comes in and what goes out against income that we may earn from both the property and from other income, maybe from our job. So if we've got, for example, $100 coming in and we've got $150 going out and there's a $50 loss, then we can claim a tax break on that $50. Now that's a simplistic view, but it's a way to explain what negative gearing means. If properties go up or properties don't go up, that's a separate issue, and that won't change the outcome for people who are negative gearing. Some people negatively gear and end up with a positive cash flow at the end because what they get back in tax from on-paper deductions is greater than the difference, and some people negatively gear and what they get back ends up making a negative cash flow because they don't quite get enough back. But that won't change unless tax rates change, unless interest rates go up by a lot, and then it's the negative gearing still works. It's just a bigger loss for people, and it's certainly not going to be impacted by whether property grows or doesn't grow. Tony from Melbourne, you've got a question about agents' listings.
Yes, hi Margaret. Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I just have a general question in relation to the agents and their list price on, say, realestate.com and so on. Over the past 6 months, I've noticed that the auction results have actually exceeded the list prices or the reserves by a substantial amount. I'm looking in the areas in Melbourne around Moonee Ponds, Essendon. So I guess I want some information on how I treat, because I'm looking to buy property, that is, treat list prices that are advertised. Do I need to add a certain percentage on to really work out where I should be? I have a property in mind, and I would like to actually try and give an offer before auction, and I don't know how that quite works and if that's appropriate.
So you're talking then, Tony, about the prices that agents list a property that's going to be auctioned at, not just a private treaty versus auction. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you're saying that they're listing them
as a range of 450 to 490, and then I get to go to the auction and it actually sells over 600,000.
Yeah, goes much higher. In fact, Rob, it's against the law for agents to do that, to undervalue a property in that way. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, does it?
That's right, and Tony, I share your frustration with this process, and it's a really interesting one. The reality is that, particularly in markets like they are at the moment, most real estate agents don't really know what a price is going to sell for. They've got an idea, but it really depends on what happens on the day and during the campaign and what else is happening in the world around that property. So generally what they try to do is approach the property with a conservative view, and if it overperforms that, then everyone's happy. So it's a very difficult topic, and certainly as a purchaser of property regularly, I find it very frustrating. What I would say, and this is, I suppose, taking my real estate agent hat and putting my purchaser hat on, I tend to sort of think about the price guide as only a guide, and if I'm really serious about that property, then I try and think about a 20% buffer on top of what they're saying. So to be prepared and to do my homework, to work out the scenario and say, well, would I buy this property for the asking price? And at what point, up to perhaps 20 or even 25% above that asking price, am I in or out of that deal? So it allows me to really think about that before going to the auction. You know, what am I really prepared to pay for this property? But it is frustrating, and the reality is that properties tend to be marketed lower than they sell for.
And Tony, I don't think you can really put a figure on it, because it depends on a number of things, and most importantly, the actual auction clearance rates in that area. Unfortunately, auction clearance rates are quoted as a Melbourne average, but it would be good if you can find out what auctions in that exact area have gone for in terms of whether or not they've sold and what the rates have been. If you're buying into an area where auction clearance rates are 20 or 30%, which can happen even if it's reported as 60% over the entire city, then you will know that it's unlikely for that property to sell much higher than the listed price, because if they're being passed in, it's because the prices aren't right. I think it's difficult for you to be able to actually have a figure in mind and go in with that figure, but this is what I do. You say you're interested in going into a property and trying to negotiate on that before it goes to auction. If you go in and see an agent and make sure that they're very aware that you are a very, very serious buyer, and you make a bid somewhere, negotiation is all about going back and forward with that particular seller until you can come up with a price. Even if your initial bid is $100,000 less than they have in their head as the price that they want, it's fine for you to go in with that bid, so long as you let the agent know that you are a serious bidder and you're interested in entering the negotiation phase. And I give that a go, but I do it as far before the auction as I possibly can. Nobody really likes to go to auction. It's very stressful, and if they can come up with a good buyer beforehand, a lot of people see the benefits in going a little bit lower, maybe not risking that auction for getting a quick sale. Well, I often field questions from people wanting to buy either a holiday property or a home to eventually retire to, like this one from Karen, and she says, I'm looking at a holiday investment in the Port Hughes Moonta Bay in South Australia. What are your views on this area? Long term, I wish to retire in the area and I'm 45. Okay, let's start with a holiday property from your perspective. Rob, just quickly, what does she need to be careful of?
Again, do your homework, be really careful. Holiday areas in particular look fantastic when the sun's shining. Understand what the rental vacancy rates are, understand what's happening with the type of tenant that you're going to get in that property, because in holiday rental areas you might get a great tenant over summer, but in winter you might really struggle to get one. So really do your homework. We all fall in love with properties when we're on holidays. I'm a sucker for it, but I never buy because I'm really aware that there's lots of issues with holiday areas.
And if you're buying it hoping that you can use it yourself in the downtime, then you're probably better to get a better property somewhere else and
absolutely
and make money out of it and then go to a different place for holidays every year anyway. Julia, what about from a tax perspective?
Well, the problem is having to apportion your expenses. If you're using it yourself, you can't claim that portion as a tax deduction, and if you tend to use it a lot yourself and it seems like the rental side is just incidental to it, then you're only going to get claim expenses associated with the time it was rented.
Okay, excellent. Karen, look, just a little bit of extra advice for you. I always worry about people who want to buy a property to invest in with a view to either using it as a holiday property themselves or ultimately retiring there. Rarely are the areas that we want to retire to eventually also hotspots today, because hotspots are those real bread and butter areas where families live, where there's a diversified industry base, where there are people who are workers, where the people are paying off their homes, working toward a better retirement themselves, and it's not generally the place that you would be retiring to, because the people who live in that area that make the hotspot such a good hotspot and such a growing area are all working on eventually getting out of there into an area where they want to retire. So having said all of that, the places that you're looking at, I don't think they're hotspots either now, and I don't think they will be for a long, long time yet. South Australia and Adelaide, it's a bit premature to be thinking about going out of the city. In Melbourne and Sydney, we've already had overvalued cities, and we're looking at going out of the cities now and getting really good buys. In Adelaide, the best buys are still right there in Adelaide in the northern and southern suburbs. Never confuse your purposes. If you want a place to retire to, don't use investing as an excuse to buy something that will otherwise not perform well as an investment for you just because you want to retire there. You're better off starting a portfolio of great properties in really good hotspots and build them up. You're only 45. You've got a good 15 years to build up to the point where you're making so much money out of that property investment portfolio that you can choose to retire wherever you'd like to retire when the time comes. You're watching Your Money, Your Call, and we've been taking some great questions tonight. It's time again for another short break, but we'll be back. And if you'd like to call and ask any question about property, perhaps be in the running to be the lucky caller who receives my book, The 20 Must Ask Questions for Every Property Investor. Call now on 1300 30 34 35, or you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. Welcome back to Your Money, Your Call. I'm Margaret Lomas, and it's been my pleasure to have with me on the panel tonight Julia Hartman from Bantax and Rob Farmer from Run. Now, there's a little bit of time left for you to call and ask any question about property investing, possibly receive a copy of one of my books. The number is 1300 30 34 35, or you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. And Rachel from the Central Coast, you've got a question about Edelong.
Yes, I do, Margaret. Thank you for taking my call. We have a two-bedroom unit at Edelong Beach, and we've had it for some time. We've been doing some renovations to it, but now we're looking at the idea of rezone the whole strata property and to be able to extend it from a single-story to a two-story. And we've been told we're looking at proximity of about $70,000 to $80,000 to do that. What does your panel and yourself think of the idea?
Okay, now I'm assuming then, because you are looking at being able to add to that it's not in the Ettalong Beach Resort there, which is the big building that people have bought into. It's not in there?
No, it's not. It's on a side street very close to the beach, though.
Okay, how many other units are in the block?
3.
3 units in the block. Okay, so what should she be looking out for here, Rob?
Rachel, my view is really just on these things without knowing the area particularly well, and I know Margaret will know it better than I will, but is do your numbers. When I look at these sorts of things, I say, well, if I have to spend a certain amount on improving a property or, in this case, extending it, what additional rent am I going to get? What are my taxable benefits from doing that? And it really becomes a mathematical equation.
Agreed. And Julia, of course, if you do that kind of structural improvement, there are going to be some depreciation benefits included?
Yes, most of it will be over 40 years. There might be the odd thing that they do, like the carpets and the curtains, that they might get over 10 or 12 years depreciation. So, but I suppose it's money spent that all has some sort of depreciation benefit. In one, it's either one or the other, as opposed to buying another property where there'd be a land portion that couldn't be depreciated.
So I guess if I sort of was doing some rough calculations on a $70,000 direct renovation, which is going to be all structural pretty much, there's probably a bit inside there, as you say, that are removables and fixtures and fittings, but you might have $50,000 of that's the structure itself, and at 2.5% a year, you're looking at roughly about $1,250 claim every year.
That's great mental arithmetic there, Margaret.
I was always good at mental arithmetic. Rachel, look, Ettalong Beach itself I don't think has a lot of growth drivers, so I think whatever you're getting out of this renovation, you're going to need every cent of that to add the value. What I'm saying is I don't think you'll add any more than you spend on that particular renovation to the underlying value of the property, because we're not seeing a lot of other growth drivers in Ettalong Beach at the moment, and I don't expect to see any for at least the next 5 years. I would go directly along to the real estate agent and find out 2 things. First of all, what they think the finished value would be, and certainly if you're borrowing to do this, the bank will also tell you the finished value. So if you're spending 70, they'll let you know whether you're going to get that back in increased value. But secondly, how much extra rent are you going to get? The numbers game becomes one of working out how much it's going to cost you to do that renovation in terms of interest on the loan, for example. If you're borrowing the $70,000, then it's going to cost you roughly $5,000 a year in interest. You need to be able to get an extra $5,000 at least in rent return to make that worthwhile. Of course, you'll have those extra tax deductions, so maybe you only need an extra $4,000. Get an accountant to help you work out the bottom line figures. I would never do a $70,000 renovation unless I thought A, I was going to get considerably increased value, or B, I was going to get considerably increased rent turn. Be careful you don't get emotionally attached and do it just because you think it would be a nice thing to do and it would look better. Vivian from Gippsland, you've got a question about first home buyers.
Yes. Hello, Margaret. My son's just bought a house. It hasn't settled yet. They will be, it's rented out for the first 8 months that they will own it, and then they are going to move in for 6 months. It needs to have a new shed and new fences and those sort of things, but they're going to rent it out again after about 7 or 8 months after they've lived in it. My question to you is, should they do these improvements when they rent it out again, or should they do it when they're in it? Which would be the best way to go?
Great question. Of course, it's Gippsland, not Gippsland. I'm just having one of those mental meltdowns today with everything that's happening here on set. Julie, that's a really good question, and you and I have actually had this conversation a number of times. People often carry out their renovations at the wrong time.
Yeah, but can I just change the topic for a minute, because I feel I need to
address the capital gains tax issue.
Yeah, she's if you don't move into the property as soon as you buy it, then as soon as practical after you buy it, then you must you lose your main residence exemption for that period of time. And there's no way you can apply the 6-year rule or anything backwards. So you're going to have this terrible capital gains tax nightmare. And before I take up too much time with that, I'll get back to, yes, if she does structural improvements like putting a shed in, it's not too bad because you get to write it off over 40 years, so it might be more convenient to do it while you're living there. As far as repairs going, always better to do while it's rented, but remembering initial repairs are considered improvements. If it needed doing when they bought it, they can't claim it as a repair anyway. It's just like building the shed, so they may as well do that while they're there too.
Okay, so probably best to really speak to your accountant and get all of that cleared up. Anything of a structural nature, they can do it any time because they're going to get the depreciation. Anything that's of a repair nature, they may get the tax deductions as long as it's rented. Gordon from Melbourne, you're our last caller tonight, and you've got a question about insurance.
Yes, thank you, Margaret and the panel, for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I'm actually considering buying a property in Sunbury.
Yes.
And I was advised by the conveyancer to get title insurance for the property. And I'm not sure, because this is my first investment, I'm not sure really whether to get the insurance or not.
Yes.
Would like to know something about why it's taken and what's the importance of it, and also with the landlord insurance, at what point should I get the landlord insurance? Is it at the settlement or before that?
Okay, very quickly here, this title insurance is a new thing. I reckon there's a company out there pushing it because I'm hearing it all the time. We have guaranteed clear title in Australia anyway, unless we're buying something under the old system title. So the short answer to that one, I guess for you, Gordon, is that if the property is, being Sunbury, it might be. Highly unlikely though, if it's under old system title, you might need it. If it's not, you won't need the title insurance. Landlord's insurance, Rob?
Landlord insurance when you put the tenant in there, but also when you buy the property, putting title insurance aside, don't forget to insure the property itself. So because even because you don't have legal title yet, doesn't mean that you may not have to call on that insurance at some time.
So maybe as soon as you've got an unconditional contract, get the building insurance. As soon as you settle, get the contents and the landlord's insurance before you get that tenant to go in.
Yeah.
Well, we've already run out of time. I'll be back next week, and joining me will be Michael Tees and Brad Beer. So get those strata and depreciation questions ready. Thank you to my guests this week, Julia Hartman from Bantax and Rob Farmer from Run. They've been a great help tonight, I'm sure you'll agree. Thanks to all of our callers. This week, our question of the week goes to, let me look on my list here, Karen. Karen, you asked about investing in Munter Bay. I'd like you to have the book so that you know the best places to buy property. If you could now email me, and this is just for Karen, on yourmoneyyourcall@destiny.com.au, I'll send you the book. Now, if you missed out on getting the book tonight, try again next week, or go online to my online store at destiny.com.au, where you can purchase all of my books. You can follow me on Twitter, Margaret Lomas AU, and also on Facebook. And you can get my free newsletter at destiny.com.au just by becoming a VIP. Melbourne viewers, get ready. March 27, that's next week, is my seminar, and I'm releasing a whole new swathe of 2012 hotspots. You can't miss them. Just go to destiny.com.au for ticket and venue information. And finally, Property Success this week goes back to Tamworth. That's this Saturday from 9 a.m. and then all throughout the day. Thanks for being with us. I'll see you next week.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.